Hello, thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Greg Pizzola. I'm on the marketing team here at Marketing Systems Group, and I'm going to be your host for episode 1 of hopefully many of a new coffee chat series we're trying out here, where we're going to talk a little informally and unscripted, taking an approach like that to discussing some topics that include some of the common problems we find around the market research industry, how we can address them. We'll answer some common questions related to our own products and services, and really a host of other topics. And please feel free to submit any discussion topics for future episodes that you would like us to discuss in this format. So in this first episode, we'll be discussing one of our newer products, our Advanced Cellular Frame, or ACF. With me today on our panel, we have 2 members of our sales development team, Hillary McDonough and Raj Bhai. Say hi, guys.
Hey.
Hello.
And our ACF subject matter expert today is our Senior Vice President of Sampling and Database Services, Dave Malarek.
Hello.
So I'm sure Hillary and Raj are ready to pounce on you, Dave, with some tough questions here. I'm going to start you off with something easy, though. Let's throw you a softball. Why don't you talk a little bit about some of the basics of really what the Advanced Cellular Frame is?
Sure. The Advanced Cellular Frame is really the next generation of cellular telephone sampling. It's built on the traditional old RDD frame, so it has all possible telephone numbers in the RDD frame. And then in addition to that, it has additional information such as name, address, a slew of demographics, geography, which really makes it a much more versatile sampling tool, both for doing RDD and a targeted sample.
Gotcha. Yeah. Thanks for that explanation, Dave. Hillary, why don't you take a stab at it?
Okay, well, thanks, Greg. Dave, thanks for being on the call. I know we, are always bothering you with specific questions, whether they be from us or from clients. So we have a couple,
Sure.
just to some clarifications and just really pick your brain because, you built the frame and you know pretty much everything. So I guess the first one is, how is it compiled? And, is it 2 separate things, the RDD and the listed, or they work in conjunction? Can you just go over a little bit of that?
Sure. The ACF frame is built on the original RDD frame. So we take every single 1,000 block that's dedicated to cellular service, identify all the telephone numbers in there. So there's roughly 550 million telephone numbers in the frame. And then we attach as much information, much ancillary data that we can to those telephone numbers, including names, addresses, individual and household demographics, and geography. So what think of it as a single database, but within there's 2 components. There's the matched component, or what we used to call listed, and then there's everything else, the unmatched, the unlisted, the unassigned telephone numbers. So if you just want to do a targeted sample, we just go in and look at those records, those telephone numbers that have the specific criteria, your geography and your demographic that you want to sample, and that's what we end up sampling. If you want to do an RDD, we include everything within that geography, and all numbers have an equal probability of selection, both from the matched, the listed component and the unlisted component.
Got it. Thank you. That's awesome.
Dave, so I have a follow-up question. So you mentioned that we have the listed and the unlisted portion. So is it safe to assume that on the listed side, that through this frame, we would have a portion of the records that have an address? And then with that being said, I'm curious. I remember that you mentioned that the database is updated quarterly. So how are the addresses handled in terms of updates?
Sure. So the listed portion of the ACF frame is about 45% of all the phone numbers. So, and the way we define the listed is that it must have an address. It must have a valid geocoded address. So that's the definition of the listed. And then the unlisted or the not listed or the unmatched, whatever you want to call it, is everything else in the frame. So with any database, any commercial database that you can get out on the marketplace, there's always aging that takes place. There's the time where the vendor that's compiling this data, there's time lag there. There's time lag for us to get the data. There's time lag for us to get the data built and loaded in and into a production environment. So over those periods of steps, the data tends to age. What we do in terms of names and addresses, once we select a telephone sample, we will send those telephoners out for a real-time name and address append. So that way we're ensuring that we're appending the most current information available in terms of names and addresses, because people tend to move over time for one reason or another. So this way it ensures that we have as much recent data in that file as possible, at least in the sample that we're providing.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I just have a quick question about maybe using the frame as more of an RDD and not, just a targeted list in the listed portion. Is it safe to say that, for example, if I was in the listed portion, like you had my name and address, and I was geocoded, and I actually have moved since I bought my telephone. So now I bought it in Philadelphia, and now I live in Wisconsin. Will I be in the Philadelphia frame if I did ACF RDD, or will I be moved to the Wisconsin frame based on my address?
You will be where you currently are based on your address. The beauty of the ACF frame is that it does a very good job in addressing migration. People who have basically picked up and moved across the country and have taken their cell phone and kept their cell phone number with them. All that migration is captured in the ACF frame. So if we were gonna sample Wisconsin, for instance, we would include all phone numbers from all area codes in the country of people that actually have moved into Wisconsin. Conversely, anyone who has moved out of Wisconsin to other parts of the country would be excluded from the frame. So this does two things. One, it improves your coverage, and it improves data collection and cuts down on data collection costs.
That's great. One of the biggest complaints, which I'm sure Raj can agree with, is clients trying to figure out those holes and really mitigate the mobility of using traditional cell RDD ways of pulling we used to do. So this is really helpful, and I think it's going to be great for the industry in general.
Right. I agree. One thing you got to keep in mind about the RDD, you have the matched and unmatched components, so we're pretty certain where those phone numbers belong. The unmatched, the only way we can keep them in a particular geography for an RDD, for instance, in Wisconsin, is to look at the rate centers that those 1,000 blocks originate from. Obviously, we don't have everybody in our frame, so a portion of those unlisted numbers that have moved elsewhere in the country, we can't identify. So in data collection, when they're fielded, that's when you're going to be identified as being out of area. But right. By and large, it is a much more efficient frame than the old traditional RDD.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Guys, so I'm going to
Dave,
interject here, Raj, but I know we are trying to keep these series a little bit shorter, get to the points with some targeted questions. So why don't we just take maybe 2 more questions, one from Raj, one from Hillary, and then we'll wrap up this first episode.
Cool.
Go ahead, Raj. Sorry.
All right. So Dave, to follow up on the last point, in terms of accuracy, let's say you're pulling sample, is there different levels of accuracy in the overall frame? And how about the different components of the listed and unlisted, or listed and unlisted? Sorry.
The big thing about the ACF frame is that it pulls on new technology to try to accurately link a telephone number to a name and address. Right. That's if you're able to do that, then you've really created a really tight, accurate, powerful database. The ACF frame pulls on newer technologies used in terms of ID authentication, validating transactions online, because there's always people that you need a cell phone number, you need an email address, you need a name, you need an address when you conduct all these types of transactions online, and that information is used to help clean up and tighten up the ACF frame. So in terms of accuracy, the matched portion is pretty good. Obviously, the unmatched, we don't know still, right? We don't know. We don't have any information about some of those telephone numbers. So really, the only thing you're going to have is basically the geography and the state and potentially the county that these phone numbers originate from.
Gotcha.
All right, I'm one last question, and it's always the big question. How is the working rate? You know, I know, you know, obviously in our industry, usually in traditional cell RDD previous to ACF, the working rate of cell RDD has been improving over the last, you know, couple years, upwards maybe 75, even 80% working in traditional cell RDD. How about the listed portion? Is that about the same, or is that even a higher working rate than our traditional cell RDD?
The listed is going to be much higher. One thing to keep in mind is that the working rate of telephone numbers is for cell is based on the number of assigned numbers relative to the total universe. So over 80% of all possible telephone numbers in the U.S. telephone network are assigned. So you would expect, you know, 75 to 80% working rate. In the listed portion of the ACF, that working rate jumps up to about 95% because there's so much information known about those telephone numbers that they're actually known to be working, known live numbers. So yeah, the listed portion is going to be a much higher working rate than the traditional RDD frame.
Okay, great. That's great news.
Awesome. Well, thank you both, Hillary and Raj, for coming on here and kind of poking and prodding at Dave a little bit. I mean, I think we took it a little easy on him this first episode, you know, a little higher level stuff. So if anyone's interested, you can go ahead and subscribe to our social media platforms. We're on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And that's where we're going to put out some alerts or notifications when the next episode comes out. Episode 2, we're going to be diving a little bit deeper into ACF, and we'll talk about some of the real advantages of the frame and some of the problems that this new sample frame can mitigate. So with that, I just want to say thank you to our panel and our expert, Dave, for joining us today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us that's watching this video, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.